Hello and welcome to Author Hour. I'm your host, Richard Lyntton, author of the Deception series, North Korea Deception, Hyde Park Deception, and Leningrad Deception. Today we have a very special guest, Colonel David Kelly, who is an ex-Marines officer and the author of two incredible history, memoir, journal books. You may remember we had him on the show once before, but his second book, First Fights in Fallujah, has just come out. So we're really pleased to have you on the show, David.
Thank you.
Please just give us a little bit, just to remind everyone, a little bit of background on your service and how you got into being I shouldn't say Royal Marines, that's the British, U.S. Marines historian.
Well, my background, I'm a high school history teacher for 41 years, Marine reservist for about 30 years, entered the Marines in 1971. 52 years ago this month, I was getting commissioned.
Congratulations,
and,
that's crazy.
And the last reserve unit that I was with was the Marine Corps Field History Detachment, which sent Marine officers and staff NCOs to combat operations to interview Marines in the field while events were happening.
So wait, let me just go back. Your service, so your original service, what position were you then?
When I was commissioned after
an officer?
Officer, yes.
Yeah. Infantry.
Second lieutenant, infantry, MOS, occupational specialty. Mm-hmm. My first unit was Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. We were stationed in Okinawa, and we floated off the coast of Vietnam 1972, 1973. Wow. We were what was called a Marine Amphibious Unit.
Yep. And
now they're called Marine Expeditionary Units, but it's the same animal, different name. Came back, served at Paris Island, several different jobs, and then was released from active duty, and then entered the reserves and did a lot of reserve staff jobs mostly over the years.
There's been an extraordinary amount of sort of world news, I think, since we last met, even the Ukraine war and now the Gaza-Israeli war. Mm-hmm. So I do think about you a lot. But let me, the show is about writing. So I want you to explain, first of all, what is a military historian or a field military historian. I know we spoke about it last time, but people may not have seen that first show. And, just tell us a little about how these incredible pieces of history. I have reached out to my contact at the Imperial War Museum in London because I think they should definitely have a copy of these. But just, and don't let me forget, I want to talk about the cover if I forget. But just explain how you got, so you left the service and you came back to do this project and you went off to Iraq and all these incredibly dangerous places. So just tell us a little bit about how that all came about.
Yeah, I had been retired from the reserves in 1999 and then had a summer duty the next summer, summer of 2000, and then I was out. I was retired. I wasn't collecting a pension yet, and at a Marine Corps birthday dinner, which Marines celebrate every year, November 10th, I met with my old commanding officer and was asking him how things had gone in 2003 during the initial invasion of Iraq, because the whole field history detachment, 12 officers and a couple of staff NCOs, they all had been activated. They all served during the combat operations in 2003. And I joked and I said, sir, if you need any help in the future, you have us retired Marines, because until you collect your pension in the reserve component, you could still be called back onto active duty.
Right.
So I wasn't 60 yet. And he laughed and he said, oh, sure, we'll give you a call. And then the following month, he gave me a call. And my wife heard me on the phone, and basically it was a lot of yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. It was an opportunity for me to actually do what I had trained to do for the last 5 years in the reserves. And even when I met Marines, when I was deployed, it was the same feeling that they joined the Marines to see if they could do these operations, and they were actually getting a chance to do them. Some of the guys said it was like you train for a game your whole life and you never get to play the game. Not that war is a game, but you never get to do what you trained to do. So I jumped at the opportunity. Was able to go back on active duty. Now, at the time that I gave yes, things were quiet in Iraq, fairly quiet. Fallujah hadn't blown up yet. And so it was March of 2004 when I was getting spun up in Washington, D.C. and reading the reports of the previous year that that's when things started to happen in Fallujah. And so what initially seemed like a fairly routine deployment was now going to turn into a deployment in an active combat zone.
Right.
So
tell us for those who don't know your work, what exactly have you done here in these two fantastic? First of all, would you call them a memoir or a what?
I've tried to come up with the word memoir, anthology. It's not an anthology because I wrote all the stories.
Right. Right.
Little biographies.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was like, wow, if you know how you get into a biography and like if you're interested in the military and you're interested in war, it's incredible. But the thing is, there's like dozens of these tales of just utter bravery and craziness and war-torn experiences, from helicopter pilots to tank commanders to soldiers on the ground. I mean, how did you come up with the idea to actually make a book?
Initially, after I was released from active duty in the summer of 2004, I kept copies of all my files, digital copies of everything, and hand copies of the journal that I kept every day, and hand copies of the notes. The following year, I thought, I'm going to listen to these things and try to transcribe them.
So wait, when you originally got the job, what were the Royal Marines going to do with your stuff? The
U.S. Marines.
The British ex-army soldiers. Sorry, guys. What were the U.S. Marines going to do with what you had, and what did they want from you? They just wanted tapes, like raw tapes, to just put in the archive.
Pretty much, what we would do, we'd interview the Marine, we'd record it on a digital recorder, create a file with a digital recording, do a summary sheet, and I have in the first book a sample of a summary sheet of an interview, which outlined what was in the interview and significant places in the interview. If a listener wanted to go to, I'm not interested in his background. I just want to know the actual events,
right.
The time hack of when that was in there. That's in the summary, and then a photograph of the Marine.
Right.
That was all digitally done, left at Washington D.C. That unit has since transferred to Quantico, Virginia, and it's there on file for researchers to use.
Right.
I was even asked to give a list to them of priorities for transcriptions.
Right.
Now, when I started to do it on my own, and it's there. All mine were unclassified. They could be accessed by any researcher that goes to Quantico. But my frustration started to come when books started coming out about Fallujah. And in many of the books where they interviewed some of the Marines that I had interviewed, it would be interview with Lance Corporal Smith by phone, 2009, 5 years after the event.
Right.
I sat down with Lance Corporal Smith 2 days after the event happened.
Amazing.
Things were fresh in his mind. So that was kind of the beginning of it.
And I just want to commend you because the detail, I really stress, if anyone's thinking what happens in Ukraine, what happens in the Israel-Gaza war when these soldiers go in, I mean, you have really given us a sense of not only, like I said at the beginning, the jobs, the helicopter pilots, what exactly happens, what exactly do they do, the tank commanders. I was a cavalryman. We call them cavalrymen, you call them tankers. But the actual shots at the vehicles and the men, and so the detail is absolutely wonderful. Have you had some? What kind of feedback have you got from this kind of raw historical, copy?
I've gotten a few emails from some of the Marines who I interviewed. One, his was very short, 2 pages, and he emailed me and he said, "Sir, I just want to thank you for telling my story." And several times in the book I say that why I wrote this was to tell their stories, to let these stories be known. And when I give talks to people about the book, I said, don't try to read a chapter.
Yeah.
It's too intense.
Yes.
Read this story, that story, and then you can put it down because you have to digest it.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I found. It's so rich in content. So again, really well done. Tell us about, how have you organized these? Like the first fights in Fallujah is the second book. Mm-hmm. Is it, explain to us if it's different from the first in format in any way, and then just explain to us, again, exactly what we're getting for those people who are interested.
The format is very similar. It just the interviews are in the order that I did the interviews.
Okay.
I didn't
How did you decide which order to do it? Just made sense.
Well, it made sense
organizationally.
Yes. in the first book, the first person I met from the unit was the battalion commander.
Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect place to start.
Right.
He gave me the big picture view, and then I met with company commander, and then platoon commanders, and then enlisted Marines, and so each chapter there basically organized itself. I didn't try to reshift things around to tell a narrative.
Gotcha.
It was each story as it came, and that's pretty much the same in the Fallujah book. It was, let me get all the aviation interviews that I have. Let me get the most interesting ones.
Yep.
Put them in there. Like there was a gunnery sergeant who was in charge of supply. Well, he's not in the book.
Right.
Even though things don't happen without supply, that's not the front line stories. So that's how it was organized. It's just by unit.
Was it just the one trip you made to do all these interviews, or did you go back a couple of times?
No. Each unit was one trip.
Okay.
And there were several times where I was.
So wait, you went out there and came back home to US?
No.
You went
No, I was in Iraq for almost 5 months.
Wow.
And I was working out of Camp Fallujah, so I'd make arrangements to go to Camp Al-Assad, or I'd make arrangements to go to Camp Al-Taqaddum, or several of the units at various times were at Camp Fallujah.
Yep.
And so the tankers were in Camp Fallujah this week. I contacted the commanding officer and went over there and set up some interviews. And then the next week, those tankers would be gone. So sometimes
5 months.
5 months of.
Were you wearing uniform?
Oh, the whole time.
Did you have a weapon?
Oh, yes.
You had your weapon just in case, because you're in an active war zone.
Yeah, we were issued pistols, and then whenever I left the camps to go to another camp, I would sign out for a rifle, and usually 180 rounds of ammunition. People said you got to have that much ammunition with you. But whenever I went off the camp, if it was on a Humvee or especially Humvees, I'd tell the driver, "Look, I want the Disney version. Just get me there. I don't need to see anything. I don't need a combat action ribbon. Just take me there."
So how did you have any hairy moments?
There was one in a little camp outside of Fallujah. It was called Camp Al-Shahabi. It was an oil for food camp, and I was just finishing up an interview with this one corporal whose picture had been on Time magazine the month before.
Really?
Yes, and
do you remember his name? Don't worry, I was just curious if I
right off the top of my head, I can't think of his name. I can see the picture.
But he was literally on the cover.
He was on the cover of Time magazine, and the guys razzed him about that. But we were talking about being at the camp, and occasionally they would get mortar fire there, and they said they had guys in the town, Marines in the town, looking for the shooters. And just at the end of the interview, before I turned off my recorder, we hear these boom, 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 right outside the warehouse. I mean, the doors were open at the end of the warehouse, about 150 feet from me. I saw these black puffs of smoke, and I looked at this Marine, and I said, "Was that incoming?" He looked at me and he said, "Sir, you better put on your flak and helmet, your flak and Kevlar." And then a couple more rounds hit, and then we went on with the rest of the day. And last year I was re-listening to that interview, and I caught the first explosions on the tape.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it when I did the interview with him at the time, but so that was the closest I came to something hitting close to me. But any time at Camp Fallujah, and Camp Fallujah is the size of Marple Township. I mean, it's a huge base.
Wow.
Incoming rounds would hit. Most of it was nothing. It was just desert with a couple of little.
But I mean, if you were standing near that incoming round, the point is you'd be dead.
One of the interviews I did, it's not in any book yet, was with a Navy nurse, and she was having lunch, or having dinner at the mess hall at Camp Fallujah, and they heard what sounded like a rocket and an explosion, and they ran to the aid station because they figured somebody was going to get hurt. And when they got to the aid station, there was a trail of blood, and a door had been blown down at the aid station. They went inside, and immediately they put on scrubs on top of the uniforms and started working on a man on the table. And during that interview with this Navy nurse, she said, then we looked and we saw this was an Army doctor who she had known for a couple of weeks. He was getting ready to leave that week. He was standing outside the aid station, and a random rocket just hit and killed him and another Navy corpsman. And there were a couple of deaths on the camp like that. So at any time during the day, there was a chance a rocket might just come in. We got to the point where we got sensitive to mortars being fired. Again, insurgents would drive close to the camp. They'd get in the back of a pickup truck. They'd set up a mortar. They'd just aim it at the general direction of the camp. They weren't adjusting for fire. It was just harassment. Sure. But I was working in a tent, and a staff sergeant was at the table with me, and we heard this, whoo, whoo, and we knew that was the sound of the mortars being fired. and you have maybe 20 seconds until they land somewhere on the camp. But right outside of every tent, there was a concrete barrier or a shelter that we went into.
Oh, I was going to say, because so the thing is, when the boys slept, when the soldiers slept, they were just in tents. So literally,
Mostly, yes.
I mean, again, I always kind of, when I'm watching the news, I want people to know what, like, when you see stuff on the news, you don't understand how terrible it is. So you're a soldier and you literally are sleeping knowing that a rocket could land on you any, that's what it was like for those guys.
Yes.
And you think, oh, it's a base, it's a camp, but no, it's still, you could literally die at any moment.
Right, exactly.
It does remind me of my very first day in Sarajevo. So I was there as a United Nations military observer. And I just remember when I arrived, they said there were 1,500 shells landing on Sarajevo every day. 1,500. Oh. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I guess it's not going to be long until I, hear one or experience one. And sure enough, my very first night, I'm sitting in the French mess hall in it was actually the former Yugoslav communication center, and suddenly there was this huge bang and some glass shattering, and I sort of scrambled to get under the table, and I'm like literally on all fours underneath the table, and then I look up and everyone else is just carrying on eating their dinner.
They knew it wasn't close.
Yeah, and sure enough, I went out onto the landing, and the glass because it was really thick walls, because it was Soviet era, communist era protection. Anyway, but it's crazy. And then of course I had a couple of close calls out and about with 12 to 1,500 shells a day landing. When you see when you were there, what was different? What surprised you about your experience going out there to do the job? What did you notice perhaps had changed in terms of soldiering since you were a young officer?
The Marines that I met, they were just focused. And again, I think because they knew that they were every day was important, every day something like they could be in combat. Where when I was on active duty, it was relatively peacetime. We were on training exercises. Every bullet was counted when we checked out for an operation. Every bullet was counted when we came back in. When I got there, when we first landed near Baghdad, before we traveled to Fallujah, we had our pistols, but we had no ammunition. Right. So one of the officers I was with, he went to the ammunition depot, and he came back with a box of ammo. And he said, "Do we have to sign for anything?" No, just what you need, just take what you need and fill them up. And it was the same thing with the M16. So they just would sign out a rifle and, "How many magazines do you need, sir? How much ammo do you need? Where do I sign?" "Sir, you don't need to sign." It's and the Marines, I think, had that feeling that, okay, this is it. We're doing the real thing. Yeah. So we're not signing for everything. We're not doing a report every time we scratch our nose.
One of the things that struck me reading some of the testimonials is that the sort of dedication to their jobs, these guys. Now, I'm sure you would say, I'm sure Army, other servicemen would say, we're the same, but specifically Royal Marines, I remember the one guy saying, my job is, I don't think about the killing of people, of the enemy. I think about protecting my Marines. Yeah. I want my Marines to come home safe and sound. And then second job is I want myself to come home safe and sound. I am curious, because you teach in high school. You mentioned you were doing a high school play right now. I am curious your sense of who the hell wants to do this job anymore? Because I signed up back in the day, Gulf War I, and I had no clue what I was getting into. And that was, like you just said, like almost a sort of a holiday camp war in those days, Gulf War I, Bosnia even, compared to what is happening now, or in Iraq, or now especially in Ukraine or Gaza. I know U.S. Marines aren't fighting there, but can you just give me your sense of, are we still going to be? Do young people still want to join up? Do you think? What is your sense of that?
It's hard to say. So there are kids that do want to do that. But when I was teaching, a lot of times I would tell the boys, I said, look, when I was in high school, you had to make a decision. The draft was on. There was a war going on. And if you went to college, you could avoid the draft for a few years. So boys had to make a decision early on in the U.S. back in the 60s and 70s to join. It's something you were going to do. Today, there's no draft, and it's a different mindset. But the Marines that I met, especially the younger ones, their response would be, I wanted to see if I could do this.
Really?
Yeah. I wanted to challenge myself to do this.
That's what struck me. These sort of working class kids from wherever, probably, not maybe particularly wealthy backgrounds. The fact that they have the sort of one-sightedness that they want to challenge themselves in this way, just I find fascinating. What is your, what else, do you want to mention any other particular stories that you really, enjoyed hearing about, or you want to, what you want to tell us about as an example?
Well, I think the one of the first stories was the one with the Lieutenant Benjamin Adams, the tank commander. And and at the time I didn't know anything about the incident. I just went to a unit and I would just give me people who have good stories. And so the company commander sent him to me, and I went through the interview and all the things that they did. And then he talked about this one incident where there was a Marine squad that was stranded in the middle of Fallujah. They had gotten lost in a vehicle, and nobody knew where they were. The radios were down, and this lieutenant was part of a quick reaction force that went into the area, and they were being shot at from all over the place. Firing an AK-47 at a tank, you might as well throw, a marshmallow at a truck. It's not going to do anything. Right. But they were being shot at.
Right.
And they were firing back. They were firing their machine gun. They were firing their main tank gun, which is a 120 millimeter cannon, at various targets. And this lieutenant said, my main gun was aimed at this building. The other tank was aimed at this building. We were being shot at, or so they thought. And he said, I came this close to firing my main gun when I saw a flak and a Kevlar.
Just explain what a main gun is, just so people understand.
That's the 120 millimeter cannon that's on the
So
tank.
Literally, guys, 120 millimeters. It's a shell that big that gets loaded into the tank, and that is what is being fired.
And that would have taken down the whole building. Right. And the Kevlar was the helmet, the flak was the flak jacket. And he said, I never felt so sick in my life. And I yelled, cease fire. But when I was interviewing him, he had his hand like this. Wow. And he said, I was ready to shoot. He said, well, I had him. The other tanker had him. We were all set to shoot. And near the end of my tour, I was interviewing the Marines who happened to be in that building. And the staff sergeant, who was the lieutenant had been wounded. He was unconscious. The staff sergeant, the lieutenant.
So I read both of those, right?
Yes,
those are in it, yeah.
Yeah, they're really the bookends to the book, to the stories there. And the staff sergeant gave me it from his perspective, how they had first been hit. The vehicle was taken out. The driver was killed. They found a building. They went inside the building. They were holding off the enemy. They called in that they were surrounded. They wanted to get out of there, and they were almost out of ammunition. And the staff sergeant said, when we saw the tanks, I was so happy.
Right.
And as he's telling me this, I'm realizing
I
know what's happening on the other end, so I can't say anything until we're at the end of the interview.
I see.
I just let them go with the story. Now, okay, we got back to the camp. They made me the platoon commander, and when I turned off my recorder, I said, Staff Sergeant Santiago, let me tell you what was going on inside the tank. And he looked at me, this Hispanic guy from California. He turned white, and he just went, no shit, sir. Because he had no idea.
Right.
And when people read this or people talk to me about it, well, how come he didn't know that? Right. As you as a military man, you don't know who's in the tank.
Right.
You're never going to meet that guy.
Yeah.
You're never going to know what's happening in the tank. So that's another thing in this book that I think there's several stories like that where you get it from several perspectives, and then the reader can put together, this is the big picture that was going on there. And I was talking to an author Friday night at the Marine Corps birthday dinner that my unit had, named Don Camp. He was a retired Marine colonel. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a really excellent book about the whole year in Fallujah that year. But that story in his book was a page. And I said to him jokingly, I said, sir, you have a page in the book, I have a chapter.
Right.
And again, his book was the big picture book. He just mentioned there was a tank, there was a rescue, the tanks came, and they got out. But I have like 5 different Marines who were inside the tank or inside the building, just that perspective that. So that's the story that I think.
Talk to us a little bit about if someone else has taken the trouble, just talk to us a little bit about how you go about, or how maybe thoughts before and after getting a publisher, getting your book actually in print, because I know people might be interested in that.
I guess about 12 years ago when I finally had gone through all of my interviews and integrated my journals and my notes into the stories. I had this 1,200-page manuscript which wasn't organized at all. It was just a whole bunch of stories. And then I pitched it to a couple of publishers. I thought, oh, Naval Institute Press, this will be right up their alley. A couple of other publishers, and got the letters that we're not publishing this type of stuff at this time.
Wow.
And then I guess about 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I started to organize it into more book-like forms. Let me take these stories and gather them into some kind of a cohesive story.
So how did you physically do that? You had literally sheets, sort of chapters printed out, and you were...
That was all online. Everything was digital.
So you had your different conversations, and you sort of started just to compile a document to try and make a book.
Yeah, I'd go through the interviews. I said, okay, let me, these 5 and these 2 and this one here, these are the ones that I'll put into this book, and I'll make a list of them. And then, all right, how am I going to organize these chapters in this thing? And about 5...
Did you get help doing the what do you call it? Not the glossary, the terms, because it's so well organized. What do you call it when they all the different?
I call it the glossary.
Yeah, the glossary. Did you get help doing that?
That was all mine.
I mean, I have to say, again, people have to understand. There's a lot of, it's like you're speaking a different language sometimes when you're talking about military stuff. But David has done beautiful, because I found myself going back and forth to the glossary just to see, oh, what's that? I wonder what that is. So you did all that yourself. Amazing.
Yeah, when I was there, when I was in Fallujah in Iraq, I part of my thing was I kept a glossary of terms that were coming up to me that I didn't know
right
at the time. And then when I started to organize the book, there were other terms I thought, well, I know what these mean, but the average person doesn't know what they mean. Like to a Marine officer, when you say the basic school, that means the 7-month training that you got after you were an officer.
Right.
If I say the basic school to you, what the heck is the basic school?
Yeah.
Or PLC or OCS, or these are all ways that they become officers. So as I was putting the book together, I kept adding to the glossary. And so
I'm cutting in because we were almost out of time. So fast forward. So how did you actually get the publisher in the end?
Finally, again, I'd have military books. I'd write to publishers there. One publisher in California.
You didn't try and get an agent. You sort of went straight to the publisher?
Because I didn't know how to do it.
Right, right.
So
you just kind of researched publisher of military.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then started. And give us a sense. Some quick fire questions. How many hours of tapes did you have?
Wow. Well, there's
just approx. Just roughly.
There's 190 interviews. Some are 10 minutes long. Some are 2 hours long. Wow. So I don't know.
Wow. Okay. That gives us an idea. Yeah. How long over how many years did it take you to actually get your sort of first manuscript?
About 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years.
And that was mostly in the summertime because I found...
Because you were working, you had a regular job.
I was working. Job. I couldn't, I had a regular job. I couldn't, and to do this type of a book, you really have to focus on it for days or hours at a time. Right, when I was teaching, I couldn't do that.
Cover. 2 great covers. And do you want to just... I know we forgot to talk about the cover last time, but I do love these. Just give us a quick, insight into how you chose, or the publisher did, or how did that work? How did you decide on the cover?
Both myself and the publisher researched photographs taken at the time. I didn't have any combat photographs. Mine were just of Marines who I was meeting with.
So these are real photographs?
Yeah, they're real. Yeah. I don't know who those Marines are, and I know they're not the Marines that I interviewed. I think that photograph was taken later that summer.
Yep.
So we went through a bunch of photos, and I looked and said, okay, these are good, these are good. The first book, they had this great cover. It was really, really good. It was really dynamic. The problem was, I looked at it and I said, that's the wrong uniform. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, that's the 2003 uniform. The Marines didn't have, the units didn't have the digital Marpat uniforms until 2004. Now, a Marine, average person wouldn't know. There's a guy in it. In fact, one of the pictures they sent me, guy had an arm patch on.
Yeah.
Now, to a Marine, I said, that's Army. Yeah. Marines don't wear any arm patches.
Right.
And this past Friday night when I was at the Marine Corps dinner, I was talking to the Marine senior artist. And he was talking about, he's being commissioned to do various paintings. And he said, the problem, he said, even if in Iraq in 2004, he said, some units still use the older uniform. Other units had the brand new uniform. So even at the same time, there was a mix of uniforms.
Yeah.
But it's great.
It
little thing like that I picked up. Okay, you can't use that other photograph because it's not the uniform that we had at the time.
David, thank you so much. We've got to end it there.
Okay.
Thank you, Colonel David Kelly, for coming and sharing your second book, First Fights in Fallujah. See you again soon.